Hello, U.S. History B students. This is your fourth module and final module on A House Divided, in which we talk about the precipitating factors for the Civil War and some of the underlying divisions and disconnects that would play into our next section, which we'll get in. We'll talk about, like, I had a couple students, like Brooklyn was mentioning, a number of you, again, tying in both Mr. Baldwin's and Mr. Thorne's student teacher, they didn't cover as much with the Civil War. It sounds like, from what I'm piecing together, things went like very, very, very quickly with the student teacher, and there was sort of maybe a mile wide and an inch deep, so to speak, as opposed to some depth in certain areas. And in this class, helping address solving the problems of the world, let's get deep on these issues that are more pertinent. No offense to the Gilded Age, which I think some of you guys got to, or even the dissolution of the Whig Party, which is not that important, so to speak, in my opinion, in terms of addressing our designs on solving the world's problems. Talking about the divisions found in Civil War era and post is going to be important. So, on that note, this is your fourth module and final one. Friday, for housekeeping stuff, Friday we're going to have a plan of a module in which I share with you guys a review, right? That'll be a review module for the test. It's our Unit 1 test, in which it will cover both The House Divided and Empire Strikes Back. So, antebellum period and Civil War era. But you want to pay attention on Friday because I'll give you some information, hopefully, that you guys can use for the test on Tuesday. I will send a mass email on a Monday sort of explaining through Swift Reach. That's the program. Some kids are like, how did you get my email? Or the district has recommended that we use the Swift Reach program, which uses all of your Power School emails as well as your parents' Power School emails for any notice. I am uploading YouTube modules. I am contacting individually, person to person, via email. But again, no Canvas course to make it a little bit more personable. So some have asked, was there any other emails? There's only been one email sent out, and that was last week, indicating that our class really is running like normal. I miss the interaction. I think that helps retention for you as a student to ask a question, get traction, understand it, and then retain it. Studies show that. Without it, yes, you're getting at best like 80% processing of the material. But really for this class, for U.S. History B, you're looking at 80% efficacy as a class. There isn't any big difference in it. And I hope you guys still go with the syllabus, like I mentioned in the email. The class is very similar. We have the lectures and the modules that you'll keep following along with the guided notes. We'll have the test in this case, or the assignment, as mentioned in the email from last week. We're not doing the incentive cycles because there's no real competitive vibe between the two classes in this case. And we'll just lather, rinse, repeat. So after the test, we'll get into our next unit, right? This class is 3 units, each one consisting of 2 different sections. And that will have an assignment we'll do, and then we'll get ready for Unit 2 test. That's the same thing as the syllabus. In fact, the exact same dates on the syllabus are what we're doing. I just want to help give you guys ownership on this, that the sky isn't falling for this class. There isn't some big disconnect. I'm choosing a more personal route through YouTube modules and person-to-person email, as opposed to a blank canvas, pun intended, thing where teachers will upload things and leave it for 2 weeks. I can't stress that enough, because I don't want students to take advantage in a bad way of the situation and say, oh, golly gee willikers, I just wasn't aware. Like, no, like, you guys are paying attention to Power School normally and your emails, so please do that. The Swift Reach program the only caveat to that is some emails might have a mass-generated email sent directly to spam or junk folder. You want to check that. But again, I've only given one email, mass-generated one, and next Monday you'll see another one sort of detailing a little bit, updating that, yes, we're now going to be in this fashion till May 1st. And maybe we'll have like a shell of a graduation before the end of the school year, and that's it. So I hope you guys can stay honest in that. I am not requiring a ton of you. I just want you to follow along with these things. And I know some kids get antsy of like, please rest assured, I've got your back. Just communicate with me. Don't take advantage of the situation either. That seems to me a little bit disingenuous if I've had a couple kids email like, oh, I just thought that, we wouldn't do anything. Why do I have a 0 on like the song assignments? Like, come on, you know better. So check your school email. The other thing is, if your Power School emails, you and your parents, are not correct, update them, right? That's going to be on your behalf. I hope that again explains things. I know 2/3 of you are like, Pierre, we get it, move on, let's get into the content. But I'm still struck on a daily basis of there's a couple stragglers like, I never got an email. And it's like, that's understandable. Make sure that you have the correct emails with your Power School account. Make sure you're checking spam and junk folders. And there's only been one. You'll only have a second one next Monday. That's a mass-generated one. But really the deadlines are all the same. Look to the syllabus on those deadlines. If any silver lining is, this is very indicative of undergrad college courses. You're going to have a ton of weeder college courses, biology, stats, stuff like that you have to take to graduate from college, that hundreds of people are in a class. And a lot of times you get lost in the shuffle. If you just hold to the syllabus, which has like heck or high water the actual deadlines of things, then you're good. Like, I don't change things up, right? I try to keep it efficient and organized. So just stick with that, simple and steady, you should be good. So you got your syllabus, you'll check the email I sent last week, and you'll check the email I sent on next Monday, and that's it. That's probably it for really like the rest of the year. I will send out for each of the test days like this mass generated email with the attached test, and it will be on your honor that you will, in that day, next Tuesday, by the end of the day, send the test answers back to me. Whether you just want to type it digitally on the sheet I give you, or if you want to like print it off, do a test, and hand it back, that'd be good too. A lot of time on the test is anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes, so please, on your honor, do that as well. So there's housekeeping things. I know a lot of you I'm preaching to the choir, but I just want to be thorough as students see the YouTube modules and they don't wake up in like a flop sweat at 2 a.m. thinking, there's a Google Classroom I gotta have, or there's a Canvas thing I gotta have. Or, no code, no Canvas. Just follow the YouTube modules, use the guided notes, and pay attention to your school email. That's with Power School. That's it. So make sure it's updated with Power School if it hasn't. Okay. Check those spam and junk folders. Now, into our last section here on Civil War, and it's on the back page. So I guess this would be your front, back. So fourth digital page, I suppose, under Finish Him. We'll see the significance of that in a second. But it also, this whole experience in terms of housekeeping, though, it does remind me, how do I say this? It helps high schoolers. I mean, a silver lining for you guys who are mostly upperclassmen. You will have at least a quarter of your college career will be in an online format. It will. And even if it's not an online format, there is in college not a lot of hand-holding. Like, you have to self-advocate and figure things and connect the dots. And for some teachers that have like a litany of busy work things on Canvas, like that could be a little harder to do. But I hope that this class at least models, you have to sort of take the reins yourself and follow through. I'm not going to be doing too much hand-holding as we model the college format. And I think that's going to be very beneficial for you. I do. Whereas other students in college might think, wait, professor, is today Tuesday? And the professor's like, yeah. You won't be in that mindset of needing constant validation and affirmation. Like, you get the things and move on. And I hope this whole experience in all of the classes can help prepare you better for the college mode. Not to say that I think college mode is great, but that's just a lot of how it is. In a developed democracy and an economy, you're going to have a ton of college classes for most of you, and there you go. All right, so under Finish Him, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 things. You can write down 5 things in this section. And that's it, and then we'll do the module on Friday. Okay. Let's see. There are a couple different principles and ideas you want to talk about here in finishing, leading up to like this climactic battle, if you want to call it. The first thing, it was one of the philosophies that was playing around here in the 50s. You have land expansion, you have arty division, a set in stone idea of the Trail of Tears. Oklahoma, that territory is now being designated as like a reservation for multiple tribes, both west, northwest, southeast, all the above. We saw Choctaw and Creek and all those guys. Okay. But as they expand more and more, there's already a habit set in place from a couple things constitutionally, but also politically, that individuals, sorry, what to say this, that individuals can be marginalized if they don't look as the traditional majority of white landholding or not landholding, males, maybe some females, that if you're not in that group, you can be marginalized and it's going to hold up in public opinion. In that case, the peculiar institution of slavery, as we saw, was also tied to Native American treatment, right, which you talked about. So you're seeing a pattern here. But then the hard thing is you're having like the tail wagging the dog, if you will. It's a little backwards. Individuals had gotten used to a peculiar institution of slavery. They wanted land for Native American things, so then they found a workaround that we can make it seem that way, whether through extreme interpretations of the Bible, KKK, etc., that blacks and Native Americans were being marginalized. How did they come to reconcile the southern states and the northern states and how we would keep that country together? Politically, there's a couple band-aids. One was called free soil. All right, so it's the first thing you can write down, free soil. Free soil is the idea that slavery might not need to be abolished, but it won't be allowed in any new state, right? So free soil was the idea that it might not need to be abolished, but it won't be allowed in any new state. That's the first thing. And the name itself embodies free soil, right? So like if we have a new state, you got to remember too, not that we're full on into manifest destiny mode of going east to west in the whole continental amalgamation. But we're coming off of the Mexican-American War. We're having a lot of new land annexation. We're having Texas come in. We haven't gotten to Gadsden Purchase and all that stuff later, but we're having a huge chunk. Louisiana Purchase is now going from territory to statehood. Our Constitution sort of had ways for a territory to come in. Northwest Territories sort of had some, but not a whole ton. They had eventually figured it out. So the question started to come up a ton is, all right, we got Oklahoma with the Native Americans, but these other territories are becoming states and are going through the proper mechanisms. But what do we do on this issue of slavery? Because that was a big dividing line. And Free Soil said, like, look, those states that have that peculiar institution, we're not going to delve into big debates on ethics and the Lincoln-Douglas style debates on it. We're just going to say free soil. Any new soil that we say is a state, that's it. Territories are different. In fact, that's why like Deseret Territory allowed slavery. Like territories could, but the moment a state came in, free soilers were saying, that's it, you can't add any new slave states. That was a weird way to reconcile up north and saying like, okay, we put the monster under the rug, we've kicked the big can 3 miles down the road, we're fine. Unfortunately, that didn't satisfy even people who were in the South. They said, no, we need to legitimize and validate what we're doing, so even if we have new states, they should have the same autonomy. This is the problem of federalism, right? It's good and bad. The top can't tell down totally what to do, nor can we see from the Civil War the South tell everybody else, or rather, in this case, the South or the bottom, can't tell the top what to do either, right? Like, there is a balancing here. Okay. The second thing in response, another way to look at it is popular sovereignty. It's like both sides are trying to be reasonable. They're like, all right, well, slavery's sort of weird. The North, that is, I say top, but the North is saying, look, we're going to have free soil, any new states there. And some of you covered this, I think, in Mr. Baldwin's class. So, for some points, what does popular sovereignty mean? I wish we had the discussion. Sovereignty is a funky thing in general. Sovereignty is the ability to, Hunter, what is it? That's right, in World Civ we talked about this. Self-rule or self-reign, hence the term sovereign. who is having the power? In the UK, the people having the power would be the Queen or the monarch. They have sovereignty. The U.S. is funky, and other democracies did the same thing. They said that the people have sovereignty, and they coined the term popular sovereignty, that the people decide. Okay, so the South counters in a cool linguistic battle and says, well, yeah, I like the idea of free soil, sort of, but here's another thing, because remember, we do have the right to choose on our own, so why don't we go with the idea that our founders had of popular sovereignty? And popular sovereignty, they use that term in sort of a disingenuous way. But the second thing you're going to write down is popular sovereignty means the idea that each new state can just vote on whether they want slavery or not. Can vote on whether they want slavery or not. There's a difference there, right? So free soil says no, you can have slavery there in South Carolina and whatever. But any new area like Nebraska or Kansas or whatever, no, they can't even vote on it. We're free soil. And some of those arguments went back to the fact that the Constitution, we'll get to in the next section, is funky in that it has a 3/5 compromise in the Constitution that says in those slave states, even though they don't recognize slaves as human beings, for population purposes, you can count them as 3/5 of a person for representation methods. So it's like the southern states in a way are getting their cake and eating it too. They get to have slavery in this peculiar institution, but not lose out on representation, right? As we'll see with the Civil War, the North had an advantage when it came to numbers. So popular sovereignty was funny in that it allowed people, they thought, this is an idea, right? These were people in Congress. This is where all the lawmakers are going back and forth. They're not calling each other doo-doo heads and you guys are horrible. They're trying to push the monster of how do we do this whole division of slavery? How do we do this? And they kept trying to push the monster under the rug and saying, well, here's a compromise of free soil. And the South was well, we can do popular sovereignty too, where it's we just get to vote on those areas. On face value, that might say, yeah, democracy is great, but we've already talked about you can't have too much of a good thing. But also, it's not even real democracy. Imagine if we had a class in third hour, in Thai, we were talking about, all right, well, we're going to decide, everybody in third hour, we're going to decide if we are able to push Ty Thomas out to go be in the ag building for all of his classes, and he won't actually get a diploma. Yeah. And we're also then going to say Ty can't vote in that process either. Meaning slavery is contingent on human beings, or even property, if you want to call it that. Those individuals had no say whether slavery could be allowed or not. So it's a disingenuous vote, thinking of another analogy, where you guys who are current juniors, exec office elections sort of happen, but not all the way through, right? Those questions of next year, it's almost as if they were to hold the election that mattered. Yeah, we totally agree that voting on exec officers matter. However, juniors won't get to vote. And it's sort of false in that, okay, freshman and sophomore now can vote. I guess it does apply to them, but it mainly applies to the juniors because it's their senior year. This is the group that really represents them and creates the identity of the year, and you don't get a chance to do it. With popular sovereignty, it's popular sovereignty except those who are of African descent. What? And females didn't have really the right to vote either. So it made it seem like it wasn't a real vote, if that makes sense. So good turns of phrase. They coined a couple turns of phrase here that are actually, free soil is a weird little compromise. We're going to have a little bit of poison ingesting it by having some slavery. And popular sovereignty is oh no, if we vote to have poison, we can do it and just drink it up. It's fine. And it's again, assisted suicide for a country. It's I guess if you wanted to do that to yourself, you can. But again, using the analogy, it's assisted suicide, but the person who is being put to death doesn't even get the vote in it, right? I guess it's probably the best analogy. It gets dark and morbid, but that is probably the best analogy, where if your family were all gathered around a loved one and that individual was going through a lot of pain, you think, and so popular sovereignty would say, all right, everybody in the family is going to vote to see if we're going to put down Granny. And you're like, whoa, what? And Granny doesn't even get a vote. That's what they coined as popular sovereignty, except those who are of African descent. So those are the weird compromises that came forth. The third thing you're going to write down here is the Whig Party, and I'll give you a little bit more background on what that is. The Whig Party started to think, we are a republic. They remembered that. Like, we're a republic with democratic principles. The Whig Party started to think we are a republic with everyone equal under the law, no matter if you're black or white. We're a republic, the law, and everyone's equal under the law, whether you're black or white. So they started to change their name to Republicans. We'll get more so in 1860. But they started to change their name to Republicans. The Whig Party changed it to Republicans. The Advent, you got to remember this. And Brooklyn and Ellie remembered this too when we were talking about it. Man, I miss you guys. But we were saying the transition of parties to parties to parties. As you shifted through the parties, there was the era of good feelings where the Democratic Republicans were winning everything. They had no real opposition with the Federalists. Federalists had died out. So then they turned in, as we talked with Jackson, the Democrats, the People's Party. The Whig Party, specifically with Henry Clay, came into play here because anyway, the Whig Party came into play as the only real purpose of them was as an opposition to the Democratic Party led by Andrew Jackson. That actually hit. That's how controversial even then Andrew Jackson was of a figure. That the Whig Party thing, even President Trump, who people have promoters, detractors, there's not a party created against him. A whole party, not an idea, a whole party. The Whig Party was an amalgamation of individuals who sort of existed for a minute. And they called them the Whigs because, oh man, for 8,000 points, if anybody knows this from we didn't even mention our World Civ class in the UK. The Whigs and the Tories. Tories were saying, we believe in the king and queen, that's it. The Whig Party, by having parliamentary Whigs, and it wasn't just the Whigs, they often had a weird haircut that sort of made it look like they were having a wig. And regardless, those guys were part of the Whig Party where they believed in a monarchy, but a constitutional monarchy. That's how they deemed Andrew Jackson. He was a freaking king in their mind, and the Whig Party had to come and play to go against him, and so they were then called the Whigs, right? Because they were wanting a limited monarch. That's how powerful they thought Andrew Jackson was then. Okay, so they started to go into this other realm of Republicans. During this time, I think Clay also ran as the National Republican. Quincy Adams did too, I think. The National Republican Party was around, and the Whigs were amorphous, going back and forth between those names. They went for Whigs for a minute, then they went back to, eventually what we know is the Republican Party, all equal under the law, black or white. That's the inception of the Republican Party. Okay, the fourth thing you're going to write down is the Compromise of 1850, the Missouri Compromise, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act were all attempts at delaying the inevitable, right? Compromise 1850, Missouri Compromise, and Kansas-Nebraska Act were all attempts at delaying the inevitable. Okay. All right, so there were a couple things that were playing out here. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was eventually overturned, but this monster, I'm just trying to think of some Pixar movie, maybe Monsters University, where there's this big monster underneath the carpet or behind the door, and people are trying to be we're okay, we're fine, this is fine, nothing's wrong. Or even the meme of the dog drinking coffee or whatever, the middle of a fire, we're fine, everything's good. That's where the country was at, because they had a ton of these Band-Aids, but the dam was going to break, the blood was going to gush, literally and figuratively, for the country. A couple of these examples, we won't go into detail on each of them, but the Missouri Compromise, there was a couple compromises that said, look, you can have Maine can come in as a free state, but we'll balance it with another state that's going to be a slave state. And some of you may have covered this with Baldwin. And then you had ideas of, well, there's going to be a parallel. Basically, the southern border of Missouri is going to now be, even though Missouri is the exception, is going to be the last slave state north of that border. And everything else, they drew lines in a weird way. Everything else from then on is going to be no other slave states north of that parallel. Okay, it's like 36-30 parallel. All right, there you go. But then the Kansas-Nebraska Act came in. They followed the mechanisms, and it was ruled that they were going to be more or less a popular sovereignty thing, and hence the idea of bleeding Kansas, because then there's battles and wars, if you will, over people flocking to those states to rig the vote and then therefore allow slavery. So that repealed the Missouri Compromise. So you had all these different compromises happening, and Henry Clay, man, that poor dude. I don't think there's a recent political guy or girl in office. Theresa May. Theresa May is Henry Clay. Theresa May was the UK Prime Minister for the last couple of years. She was in an unwinnable position. In that, I think Mason, we talked a little bit about that in World Civ. She was in an unwinnable position. The UK wanted to leave the EU, and David Cameron, the previous Prime Minister, was like, I'm out. How dare you want to leave? And then Boris Johnson, he's like the crazy floofy hair dude who looks like the UK version of President Trump. He's the current Prime Minister, and he said, we're out. We want to leave the EU. And Theresa May is trying to hold the threads of the country together. She tries admirably. Doesn't work. Henry Clay tried multiple times, and it just didn't work. Okay, so that leads into the fifth thing you're going to write down. And just write this down. I'll explain more about this. But the volatility of the country was best embodied by the Brooks-Sumner attack. By the Brooks/Sumner attack. The volatility, the anger of the country is best embodied by the Brooks-Sumner attack. Yes, the Civil War is of course, it's the best embodiment of why our country's not getting along. But the Brooks-Sumner attack is a crazy thing. You had Sumner, Charles Sumner, who was he was a northern congressperson. He had given a couple weeks before a big speech against slaveholders, specifically in South Carolina. And some of you guys remember this. Sumner was sitting there at the end of a congressional session and they waited, these Southern, specifically from South Carolina senators, they were there. Preston Brooks was there, and he took umbrage. He took, through the southern chivalry or what have you, how dare thee and thine household disparage the name of South Carolina and other slaveholders. And he then said in a low oral voice, I have read your speech multiple times, Senator Sumner, and I believe that it is libel against the good people of South Carolina. False, malicious statements. And before Sumner could even, he was finishing writing up, it's almost the equivalent of some big fight going down in a class, and everybody sort of knows it's going to happen, but they all shuffle out. And before Sumner gets even a chance to look up, Brooks comes down on him with a big cane and a gold crest at the top and just starts wailing on his head and bashing his head in. And at this point, people scatter. There are some spectators from the South who are there in a malicious, bloodthirsty, yeah, take it to him. Don't talk about slaveholders. Sumner was saying, this is not a peculiar institution, but an inherently evil institution. And they need to be looking to their Christian morals to do that. So he was, very much putting himself out there. And Brooks' guy was how dare you disparage the name of the South? And he stands up then on the desk. The desks there were bolted into the ground. There was a chair that was movable, but bolted in. Starts wailing him on the desk. And then Sumner goes underneath the desk and then is thinking, instead of pushing the chair out to do it, he gets shocked. At this point, he loses eyesight for a couple weeks at least, but right when he got hit in the head at the beginning, hundreds of smashes on the head, hundreds with this cane and this gold crest at the top. And Sumner is so shocked, scared, he actually stands up and roots the desk off of the bolts to try to get away. And then he's running, blood's coming down from his head, he's running out. And now he's an even bigger target because like he's more less mobile or whatever, more shaken around. That Brooks starts wailing him even more, hundreds of blows to the head. Then others intercede to make sure that he doesn't kill him. But what happens is Sumner, who then returns after a while back to being a senator, is never the same way again. Sumner's speech is published throughout the country. The Northerners use this as fodder for an eventual war. The Southerners say, way to stand up for our own integrity, Brooks. Sumner, for the rest of his life, has traumatic brain injuries. He has a little bit slurred speech. He actually goes 2 years after the anniversary of it to a weird experimental. He's diagnosed with a spinal cord injury, and so this is the great medicine, 1850s. The spinal cord injury, they say, is the best way to help solve it is if we burn the skin on the outside that's close to your spinal cord. And if we don't use anesthesia, then it'll be more effective to reduce your headaches and your blurred vision and some of your paralysis. And the dude's a stud. He's like, all right, let's go for it. And he subjects himself to getting his skin burned down his spinal column to help alleviate the pain. Doesn't do anything. The poor guy, he eventually dies decades later, right? He still serves as a senator, but he has much reduced load. He dies decades later of a heart attack, but he suffered his whole life from brain hemorrhaging and traumatic brain injury. On the brink, right? We're on the brink. This house divided is going to be divided, if not in a day, now. Sumner and Brooks attack is a perfect distillation of that. All right, so that's it. You'll see a review module on Friday, and then the test be aware of for the email both Monday and then Tuesday. I'll send that out. Okay, I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.